At my fifth wedding anniversary party, my husband raised his champagne glass in front of more than 100 guests and smiled. Without me, she would be nothing. Everything she has is because of me. Awkward laughter filled the ballroom. I stayed silent. Then he added, "She doesn't even deserve to carry my last name." Everyone waited for me to cry. Instead, a chair scraped against the floor. My grandfather slowly stood. "Then she'll carry mine," he said, "and take back everything that was always hers." My husband's smile vanished. This story starts quietly, but it won't leave you unchanged. Before we begin, drop a quick comment. Have you ever had to fight to protect something you built, yes or no? I read your comments more than you think. Just a note. Some details have been adjusted for storytelling and reflection. What matters most is the message at the heart of this story. I am Elodie Whitfield, 34 years old, and I am watching my husband prepare to destroy me in front of 120 people. The Langham Boston Ballroom glittered with warm lighting and white orchids. A jazz quartet played softly near the bar. Preston Weaver, my husband of 5 years and 41 years old, stood at the podium in a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, smiling like a man who believed he had already won. He tapped his champagne glass with the edge of his wedding ring, one deliberate crystal note that cut through conversation and turned every face toward the front. 5 years ago, he began, his voice smooth and practiced. I made a promise to build something extraordinary with the woman standing beside me tonight. I stood 3 feet to his left, my own champagne untouched, my face arranged in the expression I had perfected over 60 months of marriage, warm, attentive, supportive. The kind of face that photographs well, the kind that does not ask questions. My grandfather, Clarence Whitfield, 79 years old, and the man who built the foundation that carried our family name, sat 3 chairs from the head table, with his hands folded and his face unreadable. He had taught me to play chess when I was 7. He had taught me that the most important moves happen long before your opponent realizes the game has started. Preston continued, "Marriage is a partnership, a collaboration, and I have invested everything in this partnership, my vision, my resources, my name." The guests smiled. They raised their glasses, slightly anticipating the sentimental turn. I counted 120 faces. I knew exactly 64 of them personally. The rest were Preston's. "What you do not see," Preston said, his tone shifting with surgical precision, "is the work. The constant work of building someone up, of seeing potential where others see ordinary and lifting that potential into something marketable." Iris Weaver. Preston's 67-year-old mother sat near the front with pearls at her throat and her eyes on her son like he was delivering scripture. Lawrence Townsend, the 62-year-old family attorney, sat beside the projection screen with a gray folder in front of him and his phone face down on the table. He had not touched his wine. I had been waiting for exactly this moment for 2 years. Preston's voice hardened. "If it were not for me, she would be nothing." Nervous laughter started, polite, uncertain, the kind people produce when they are not sure if they heard correctly. A few guests glanced at me. I did not move. "Everything she has accomplished," Preston continued, his smile widening, "I made possible." The laughter died. "She does not deserve to carry my name." The ballroom went silent. 120 faces turned toward me. My face felt warm, not from embarrassment, but from the effort of keeping every muscle exactly where I needed it. I did not flinch. I did not cry. I did not look away. Everyone watched me the way people watch glass hit the floor, waiting for the crack. You need to understand what public humiliation actually feels like, not the volume of it, but the architecture. It is not the words themselves. It is the deliberate construction of a moment designed to make you small, to make you prove you are not small, and then to punish you either way. Preston had practiced this. I could hear it in the rhythm of his pauses, in the way he held the microphone, in the angle of his smile. Saskia Calloway, 29 years old and seated anonymously at the back table, watched Preston with the expression of someone witnessing an inevitable collision. She knew what was coming. She had helped him write it. But Preston did not know what I knew. He did not know that silence can be a choice instead of a paralysis. I stood perfectly still. I let them look. I let them wonder. And I waited. The scrape of a chair against polished floor broke the silence, slow, deliberate, impossibly loud. My grandfather stood. He did not stand quickly. He did not stand with anger or drama. He stood the way a man stands when he has already made his decision and is simply tired of watching other people pretend. Clarence looked at Preston with calm, measured expression. "Then she will carry mine," he said quietly, "and everything that comes with it." The words landed like architecture's solid, immovable final. Preston's smile collapsed. Not slowly, not gracefully. It shattered in real time. His hand tightened around the champagne glass. His eyes went to Clarence, then to me, then back to Clarence. "No!" His voice dropped to a whisper, but the microphone caught it anyway. "Grandpa, you cannot do this to me." Watching Preston's confidence shatter was like watching a building lose its foundation in real time, the kind of collapse you cannot stop once the structure realizes what is missing. He had built this entire evening around a single assumption. He had believed the Whitfield name, the Whitfield Foundation, the Whitfield legacy, all of it was his to control because he had married into it. He had believed my grandfather would choose him. He had believed wrong. Lawrence Townsend opened the gray folder. The sound of paper whispered through the silence. I realized, standing there with 120 witnesses watching my marriage disintegrate under warm lighting and white orchids, that this dinner had never really been about my last name, or my worth, or Preston's cruelty. It was about a secret decision my family had made, a decision Preston believed was his to claim. Clarence remained standing. Preston remained frozen at the podium. The jazz quartet had stopped playing. No one moved. No one spoke. And I understood finally what my grandfather meant when he gave me that first chess lesson at 7 years old. But before I explain how that night ended, I need to take you back to where it really began, not at the altar, and not when I found his secret folder. I need to take you back 5 years to the night before my wedding, when my grandfather made me promise something that would define every single day of the marriage I was about to enter. That promise is why I am still standing here, champagne untouched, face warm and expression calm, while my husband realizes he has just lost everything. To understand why Clarence's words shattered Preston so completely, you need to know what happened 5 years earlier, the night before my wedding, when my grandfather made me a promise I did not want to keep. June 2018. I was 29 years old, engaged to a man I believed loved me for exactly who I was, sitting in my grandfather's private library at the Beacon Hill mansion, with rain drumming against windows and 2 cups of Earl Grey cooling between us. The library smelled like old leather and pipe tobacco, even though Clarence had quit smoking a decade earlier. The scent had soaked into first editions and burgundy armchairs. I sat in the chair my grandmother used to occupy, the one with the embroidered cushion that sagged slightly left. Clarence sat across from me with his hands folded, wearing the expression I recognized from childhood, the one that meant he was about to say something I would not want to hear. "I need to ask you something before tomorrow," he said quietly. "And I need you to be honest with me, even if the answer is not what I want to hear." I wrapped my hands around the teacup still warm. "You are going to ask me if I am certain about Preston." "I ran a background check on him," Clarence said, "the week after you introduced us." The words landed without drama, just fact. I set the teacup down carefully, focusing on the small clink of porcelain against saucer. "Did you?" I said. It was not a question. "Clean record, good education, respectable references, a small development firm with steady clients and manageable debt." Clarence paused. "Everything checked out, every single box, and that is what worries me." I looked at him, waiting. "People are complicated," he continued. "Messy. They have traffic tickets and late payments and references who damn them with faint praise. Preston's file reads like a resume designed to pass inspection. It is too perfect. It tells me nothing about who he actually is." The rain against windows sounded like static white noise filling the space where I should have been defending the man I was marrying in 14 hours. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. Clarence leaned forward and placed his hand over mine. His palm was warm, papery familiar. "Do not tell him what you will inherit. Not yet. I want to see who he really is when he thinks there is nothing to gain." I pulled my hand back. "That is not fair to him." "Fair," Clarence repeated, tasting the word. "You are about to marry a man you have known for 18 months. You believe he loves you. I am asking you to test that belief with evidence instead of faith. And if he is exactly who he says he is, I asked, if I am right about him, then we will both be grateful I was wrong. I stood, walked to the window, pressed my palm against cold glass. The rain blurred Boston into watercolor soft lights, no edges, everything uncertain. You are asking me to lie to him. I am asking you not to volunteer information, Clarence corrected. There is a difference. You are not required to tell him about the foundation or your role in it. Most wives do not discuss family trusts on their wedding night. What does it mean to protect someone you love, to shield them from pain, or to give them the tools to recognize truth when it finally reveals itself? My grandfather was not trying to stop my wedding. He was simply asking me to wait, to watch, to see. How long? I asked, still facing the window. As long as it takes for you to be certain. I turned back to him, and if I refuse, Clarence stood, walked to his desk, wrote something on a piece of paper with his fountain pen, the one my grandmother gave him for their 30th anniversary, the one that leaked slightly and left ink stains on his shirt pocket. He folded the paper once and handed it to me. A phone number, nothing else. This is my lawyer, he said. Use it when you are ready, not before. And Elodie, he paused. I am not trying to sabotage your happiness. I am trying to protect the foundation. The Whitfield Heritage Foundation is worth $85 million. It employs 42 people. It preserves buildings that would otherwise be demolished for parking lots. If Preston is who you believe he is, then eventually you will run it together. But if he is not, if he is someone else entirely, then I need to know that before we make him family. The paper felt impossibly light in my hand. Just a phone number. Just insurance I would never need. This is a test, I said. This is protection, Clarence corrected. Not the kind that shields you from pain. The kind that gives you time to see clearly. I looked at the number again, 7 digits and an area code. Lawrence Townsend, though I did not know that name yet. I would not learn it for another 2 years, not until the first time I noticed Preston lying about something small. Something that should not have mattered, but somehow did. That phone number sat in my wallet for 5 years like a fire alarm behind glass. Something you install, hoping you will never need to break it open. I carried it through my wedding, through the honeymoon in Barcelona, through 3 anniversaries. I carried it the day Preston introduced me as his wife, who dabbles in architecture. I carried it the morning I found emails on his laptop referring to me as the Whitfield connection. I tucked the paper into my wallet that night between my driver's license and emergency credit card. I will not need it, Grandpa. I know him. I hope you are right, Clarence said, but keep it anyway. The next day, I married Preston Weaver in a small ceremony at the Boston Public Library, surrounded by books and promises. I wore my grandmother's pearl earrings. I carried white roses. Preston cried during his vows. Everyone said we looked happy. I kept that promise for 5 years. And in those 5 years, I learned everything I needed to know about the man I married, not through warnings or background checks, but through evidence he built himself one lie at a time. The marriage was not a mistake. It was a test I did not know I was administering until the results came back definitive. By the time I finally dialed that number, I had already compiled more evidence than my grandfather's investigator ever could. The lies started small, so small I almost convinced myself they were harmless. Our wedding day in June 2018 was perfect. Preston cried during his vows. I wore my grandmother's pearl earrings. We honeymooned in Barcelona and came home to the South End penthouse he had leased, 1-bedroom exposed brick, a view of the harbor that cost more than I made in 6 months. He said it was an investment in our future. I did not tell him I could have bought the building. The first lie came 3 months later at a preservation gala in September. I had just secured historical designation for a row of 19th-century townhouses in the South End, 18 months of research, zoning battles, and testimony before the Massachusetts Historical Commission. The director of the Boston Preservation Alliance congratulated me publicly, called the work exemplary. People applauded. Preston stood beside me with champagne and his arm around my waist, smiling like a proud partner. She has good instincts, he said, his voice warm and approving. I helped her find the right rooms to apply them in. The director nodded. Another donor said we made a wonderful partnership. Everyone smiled. I opened my mouth to correct him, then I remembered my promise to my grandfather. I closed it. That was the moment I stopped being a naive bride and became something else entirely, an observer conducting an experiment I had not fully understood I was running. Preston squeezed my shoulder. "We make a good team," he said. I smiled. I said nothing, and the lie passed into the record unchallenged. The pattern repeated, it amplified. Year 2 at a foundation fundraiser where I presented a proposal to restore a warehouse in the Harbor District. Preston stood when I finished and added context. I saw her potential before she did. He told the room of 60 donors. That is what partnership means, recognizing talent and giving it structure. Applause, nods, agreement. I thanked them for their support. I did not mention that I had been restoring historic properties since I was 26, 3 years before I met Preston. I did not mention that the warehouse proposal had taken me 14 months to research and that Preston had never read a single page of it. I smiled. I nodded. I collected business cards and wrote thank you notes and let Preston tell the story his way. Year 3, a colleague I respected, an architect I had studied under in graduate school, introduced me at a conference as Preston Weaver's wife, the architect he had mentored. The woman who taught me everything I knew about adaptive reuse called me someone else's student. Preston was not even in the room. I did not correct her. By year 4, I stopped counting how many times Preston rewrote the story. I started cataloging what he revealed each time he lied. The lies showed me what he valued. They showed me what he wanted people to believe. They showed me that he needed to be the architect of my success more than he needed me to actually succeed. Have you ever stood in a crowded room and realized you have become invisible, not because no one sees you, but because the person they see is not you at all? They see a story someone else wrote. They see a character performing lines you never agreed to speak. And the worst part is not the invisibility itself. It is realizing you participated in your own erasure by staying silent. But silence was evidence. Silence was observation. Silence was keeping the promise I made the night before my wedding, and every time I stayed quiet, I learned something new about the man I married. I learned he needed to diminish me to feel significant. I learned he believed his own value came from comparison, from being better than, smarter than, more essential than the person standing beside him. I learned that my accomplishments threatened something deep in him, something he had to control by reframing every achievement as his gift to me rather than my work. And I learned that he was building towards something. I did not know what yet. But you do not spend 5 years systematically rewriting someone's professional narrative unless you plan to claim ownership of more than just credit. Year 5 started quietly. January 2023. We had been married 4.5 years. Preston's development firm was stable. My restoration work was gaining recognition, though always with the asterisk of his involvement attached. We attended the same galas, the same donor events, the same fundraisers where I smiled and he spoke and everyone believed we were exactly what we appeared to be. In March, at a donor event for the foundation, though I still was not supposed to know I would inherit control of it, Preston told a story I had heard a dozen times before. But this time, something was different. When I met Elodie, he said to a table of major contributors, she was talented but directionless. I gave her structure, opportunity, visibility. He said it with such conviction, such certainty. He was not performing anymore. He was not crafting a narrative for strategic effect. He was stating what he believed to be simple fact. I looked at him across the table. My husband of 5 years. The man who shared my bed and my address and my daily life, and I realized he had told the story so many times that he genuinely believed it now. He had forgotten I was standing in that South End preservation office 3 years before we met. He had forgotten, or perhaps never acknowledged, that I had a career, a reputation, a professional identity that existed independently of him. In architecture, we call it demolition by replacement, when you tear down a structure so gradually that people do not notice it is gone until a completely different building stands in its place. Preston had spent 5 years demolishing my professional history and replacing it with a structure that positioned him as the foundation and me as the addition he built on top. And he believed it. That was what made him dangerous. That was when I knew observation was not enough anymore. I needed documentation. I needed proof of what he was planning beneath the performance. I had spent 5 years collecting evidence of who Preston was when he thought I would never inherit anything worth taking, but observation only shows you the surface. Then came the night in May when I opened his laptop to print a document for a zoning hearing and found a folder he had forgotten to hide. Inside that folder was proof that every lie, every rewritten story, every piece of stolen credit had been building towards something far more calculated than ego. It was 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night in May when I opened my husband's laptop to print a single page and found 47 reasons to end my marriage. I needed an architectural blueprint for a client meeting the next morning. My laptop was charging in the bedroom. Preston sat on the desk in our study screen, dark, waiting. He was asleep upstairs. I pressed the power button. The desktop loaded organized folders, clean background. Everything precisely labeled the way Preston organized everything in his life. Then I saw it, a folder in the upper right corner dated 3 days earlier. The title read, Restructuring Phase 2 Whitfield. My family name, not his, mine. Restructuring Phase 2, which meant there had been a Phase 1 I had never seen. I clicked the folder, my hand was perfectly steady. 47 documents. PDFs, scanned images, typed agreements. The first file opened with a header in formal legal language: transfer of assets, Whitfield Heritage Foundation to Weaver Development, LLC. I sat down in Preston's desk chair, leather expensive, the kind that adjusts to your weight and temperature. The blue light from the screen cast shadows across the study. Outside Boston, traffic hummed 3 stories below. Inside, my marriage ended with the quiet click of a mouse. The folder was not hidden. It was not encrypted. It sat on his desktop like a grocery list, like something so mundane he did not think twice about leaving it visible. That told me everything I needed to know about how confident Preston was that I would never look. About how invisible he believed I had become. I scrolled through the documents methodically. Page 1. Executive Summary. Outlining complete transfer of operational control of the Whitfield Heritage Foundation to Weaver Development, LLC, effective upon execution of attached agreements. Page 7. Asset Inventory. Listing all 12 heritage properties held by the foundation, addresses, assessed values, historical designations. Buildings I had spent years protecting, cataloged like items for auction. Page 12. Financial Summary. $85 million in foundation assets, endowment funds, and real estate holdings. Page 19. Liquidation Schedule. A timeline for selling the properties, dissolving preservation easements, converting the foundation into a private development vehicle. Page 23. Preston's business plan for luxury condominiums in the South End row houses I had fought to preserve. Page 47. Signature lines. Preston's signature was there, genuine witness, dated 2 weeks ago. Below his, a second signature line with my name typed beneath it. Elodie Whitfield, Chairwoman, Whitfield Heritage Foundation. The signature was already filled in, ink, permanent, final. Except it was not my signature. Close, very close. Someone had studied my handwriting, the loops, the slant, the way I crossed my T's. But the pressure was wrong. The angle was off by maybe 5 degrees. The capital E had a flourish I had never used. You need to understand something about forgery. It is not just theft of your name, it is theft of your consent, your agency, your right to say no. It is someone deciding that your permission is optional, that your voice is inconvenient, that your existence is something to be erased and replaced with a version that serves their purpose. I looked at that signature, my name in someone else's handwriting, and understood that Preston had not been rewriting my professional narrative for 5 years because of ego or insecurity. He had been establishing a pattern, building a story, creating a public record of me as someone incompetent, directionless, entirely dependent on his guidance, so that when the time came to forge my signature on documents transferring everything I would inherit, everyone who knew us would believe I had signed willingly, gratefully, because without Preston, what would I possibly do with all that responsibility? I sat completely motionless for 4 minutes. I know it was 4 minutes because I counted. I counted to 60, then 60 again, then 60 again, then 60 again. 4 minutes. That is how long it took for my marriage to become evidence in a crime I had not known I was part of. Then I pulled out my phone. I photographed every page. Methodical. Thorough. No shaking hands. I made sure every line was legible, every signature visible, every date documented. I photographed the folder name on the desktop. I photographed the file properties showing creation dates. I photographed Preston's recently opened documents list showing he had accessed these files 4 times in the past week. 47 photos, each one a felony: wire fraud, identity theft, forgery, conspiracy to commit theft of assets exceeding $5 million. I closed the laptop exactly as I had found it. Screen dark, folder unopened. No trace that I had been there. Then I walked upstairs to the bedroom. Preston was asleep on his side, facing away from my half of the bed. His breathing was deep and even. His phone was charging on the nightstand. His watch sat beside it, face up, the second hand ticking steadily forward. He looked peaceful, like a man who had done nothing wrong, like a man who believed his own performance so completely that he could sleep soundly beside the woman whose entire inheritance he was planning to steal. I stood in the doorway for maybe 30 seconds. I did not feel anything. Not rage, not grief, not betrayal. Those emotions would come later, maybe when there was time for them. That night, I felt only the cold, clear precision of someone who had just found exactly the evidence she had spent 5 years preparing to recognize. I went to the kitchen, I filled the kettle. I turned on the burner and waited for the water to boil. While I waited, I watched my phone upload 47 photographs to cloud storage. Encrypted, backed up, safe. In preservation work, we document every detail before restoration begins. Photographs, measurements, material samples, so we know exactly what we are saving and what we are removing. That night, I documented my marriage the same way. Evidence first. Emotion never. I made chamomile tea and sat at our kitchen table in the dark and thought about the phone number in my wallet I had carried for 5 years. The one my grandfather had given me the night before my wedding. The one I had been certain I would never need. Some realizations are too large for tears. They require plans. The next morning, I called a number I had never dialed before, a number my grandfather had given me with one instruction: use it when you are ready, not before. I was ready. What I did not know yet was that Clarence had been ready for years. He answered on the first ring, and his first words told me everything I needed to know about how long I had been the last person in my own story. Miss Whitfield, the voice said. Professional, calm, unsurprised. I have been expecting your call. Lawrence Townsend, 62 years old and senior partner at the law firm that had served my grandfather's foundation since its founding, spoke like a man who had been waiting by the phone. Can you come to my office this morning? He continued. I believe we have a great deal to discuss. I was standing in my kitchen with Preston asleep upstairs and 47 photographs of forged documents on my phone. I had slept maybe 2 hours. Yes, I said. When? 1 hour, Townsend and Associates, Back Bay. I will clear my schedule. He gave me the address. He did not ask what I had found. He simply gave me an address and a time, as if this meeting had been scheduled for years. I drove to Back Bay in morning traffic. The building was old brick with mahogany paneling and leather furniture, the kind of place where serious money solved serious problems. Lawrence met me in the lobby personally. Tall silver hair, navy suit, calm competence that cost $500 an hour. He shook my hand and led me to a conference room overlooking Newbury Street. Coffee tea, he asked. No, thank you. He closed the door. The silence was absolute. He sat across from me and folded his hands. Before you tell me what you found, he said, I need to tell you what we have already begun. We, not I, we. Your grandfather contacted me 3 days ago, Lawrence continued. We have already begun the process of making sure everything he spent his life building stays exactly where it belongs. 3 days ago, I had found the folder last night. Tuesday night, 11 o'clock. 3 days before that would be Saturday. 3 days, I repeated, before I found anything. Lawrence nodded. He has been monitoring the situation closely. When certain indicators appeared, he knew it was time to act. What indicators? Your husband made several inquiries last week. Legal consultations regarding foundation governance, asset transfer protocols, signature requirements. He was careful, used different firms, paid in cash, but not careful enough. Your grandfather has relationships throughout Boston's legal community. When someone starts asking very specific questions about transferring a specific foundation, word travels. Preston had been preparing his final move, Clarence had been watching, and I had been carrying photographs believing I had discovered something no one else knew. I found documents on his laptop, I said. Forged transfer agreements, my signature, 47 pages. May I see them? I showed him the photographs. Lawrence put on reading glasses and scrolled through each image methodically. His expression never changed, not shock, not anger, just careful attention to evidence he had already expected to exist. What does it mean when the person who loves you most in the world watches you walk into danger and does nothing to stop you? Is it cruelty or is it faith that you will survive strong enough to understand why? I watched Lawrence review the documents and felt the question building. How long has he known? I asked. My grandfather, about Preston, about what he really wanted. Lawrence looked up from my phone. He set it down carefully, removed his reading glasses, folded them. All of this took perhaps 5 seconds, but it felt like watching someone prepare to deliver news that would break something. Since before the wedding, Miss Whitfield. The room was very quiet. Since before, I repeated. Lawrence nodded. The background check revealed certain patterns, financial instability masked by careful image management. A history of relationships with women from established families. Relationships that ended when it became clear there was no inheritance to access. References impressive on paper but meaningless under scrutiny. Your grandfather saw the warning signs. And he let me marry him anyway. Yes. Why? Lawrence chose his words with precision. Because he believed you were strong enough to survive the truth in a way you were not yet strong enough to survive the warning. And because the legal protections he needed to put in place required time, years, documentation, evidence of intent and pattern. You cannot defend against a threat that has not yet revealed itself. In restoration work, sometimes you have to let a structure deteriorate to a certain point before you can prove it needs saving, before anyone will believe the foundation was rotted all along. But structures are not people. Structures do not feel pain while they slowly collapse. Structures do not spend 5 years married to lies. He let me walk down that aisle, I said, knowing exactly who waited at the altar. He let me promise forever to a lie. He let you choose, Lawrence corrected gently, and he made sure that when the lie revealed itself, you would have every resource you needed to protect what was yours. Resources, I said. The word tasted bitter. Legal structures put in place over years. Documentation, safeguards, a foundation that cannot be transferred regardless of what Preston forges or who he convinces. I looked at Lawrence across the polished conference table. Behind him, Newberry Street moved with morning traffic, people going to work, buying coffee, living normal lives where grandfathers did not let their granddaughters marry predators as part of some longer strategic game. What kind of protection, I asked quietly, requires watching someone you love marry a man you know will hurt them? Lawrence met my eyes. The kind that transforms hurt into evidence, and evidence into permanent safety. My grandfather had known since before my wedding day, and he had let me marry Preston anyway. Let me promise forever, build a home, spend 5 years collecting evidence, one humiliation at a time. The question was not whether he had protected me. The question was, what kind of protection requires watching someone you love marry a predator? Lawrence leaned forward slightly. There is something else you need to understand about what your grandfather built. Something that makes every document on your phone, every signature pressed and forged, every plan he spent 5 years constructing completely meaningless. He had one more thing to tell me. Something about the legal structure Clarence had built that made Preston's entire scheme impossible from the day it began. Lawrence opened a second folder heavier than the first and slid a document across the mahogany table that answered every question I had been afraid to ask. This, he said, is what makes everything your husband planned legally impossible. The document was bound, professional, stamped with official seals. The header read, Declaration of Irrevocable Trust, Whitfield Heritage Foundation. Below that, a date, March 2020. 3 years ago, the second year of my marriage. 3 years ago, Lawrence said, watching my face. Your grandfather transferred the entire foundation into an irrevocable trust under the Massachusetts Uniform Trust Code. You are the sole trustee and the sole beneficiary. I read the first page, then the second. Legal language dense and precise, but the meaning was clear enough. Every asset, every property, every dollar, all of it placed in a structure that could not be dissolved, could not be transferred, could not be touched without my express written authorization. What does that mean? I asked, in plain terms. It means, Lawrence said, that no transfer assignment or encumbrance of foundation assets is valid without your express written authorization witnessed by independent legal counsel. Any purported transfer executed without this authorization is void ab initio. Void from inception, I translated. Lawrence nodded, as if it never existed, as if the signatures were written on air. I looked down at the document again. March 2020. Preston and I had been married less than 2 years. We were still in the phase where he held my hand at dinner parties and told people I was brilliant. The phase where I still believed the lies were accidental. The credit-taking was unconscious. The erasure was something I could gently correct over time. While I was believing that my grandfather was building this, the 47 pages I found, I said slowly, the transfer agreements, the forged signature. Legally meaningless, Lawrence confirmed. From the moment your husband drafted them, no court would honor the transfer. No bank would execute it. The foundation was never at risk, not for a single day. I sat very still, processing what that meant. Preston had spent 4 years building his scheme. 4 years of calculated lies, systematic erasure, careful performance. 4 years of positioning himself as my benefactor, my mentor, my savior, all to establish the credibility he would need when he finally presented forged documents, transferring everything I would inherit. And every single day of those 4 years, the thing he was trying to steal was legally untouchable. You are telling me, I said, he spent 4 years planning something that was legally impossible from the start. Yes, Lawrence said, and he did not know. What does it do to a man's mind to spend 4 years building a plan so elaborate, so calculated, only to discover he was attacking something that could never be taken, chasing something that was never actually within reach? What kind of obsession drives you to forge documents for assets you could never possess, to lie for years about value you could never access, to build an entire identity around a theft that was structurally impossible? I thought about Preston at his laptop creating those 47 pages. Hours of work. Research into legal language trust structures, signature requirements. Practicing my handwriting until he could forge it. Dating the documents, witnessing them building what he believed was a complete legal framework. All of it worthless. All of it attacking a fortress he did not know was impenetrable. Then why? I asked the question, tasting bitter. Did you let this continue? If the foundation was safe, if nothing could actually be taken, why not just tell him? Why let him keep going? Why let me? I stopped. The end of that sentence was too raw to speak out loud. Why let me spend 5 years married to this? Why let me collect evidence one humiliation at a time? Why let me believe I was protecting something when it was never actually vulnerable? Lawrence set down his pen. He looked at me with the expression of someone delivering truth that would hurt but was necessary anyway. Because your grandfather wanted more than to stop him, Lawrence said quietly. He wanted you to see exactly who you married, not through warnings you might dismiss or background checks you might rationalize, through evidence you collected yourself, evidence you could not deny because you had watched it accumulate in real time. I thought about the 5 years, the lies at galas, the stolen credit at fundraisers, the systematic rewriting of my professional history. Every instance I had cataloged believing I was building a case. And, Lawrence continued, he wanted it on record. Every forged signature, every fraudulent document, every calculated lie, all of it documented and prosecutable. Prosecutable, I repeated. Lawrence nodded. Wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit grand larceny, forgery of legal instruments. Your husband did not just plan to steal from you, he committed federal crimes in the attempt. And because the foundation was never actually vulnerable, he had no legitimate legal defense, no claim of good faith, no argument of authorization, no possibility of consent. In preservation, we call it a load-bearing wall, the structure that holds everything else in place, invisible to those who do not know how to read a building's bones. My grandfather built me a legal load-bearing wall 3 years before I even knew I would need it. And then he let Preston attack it over and over, documenting every assault. He built a trap, I said. Lawrence did not disagree. A very effective one. The foundation was safe. I was never going to lose anything. But Preston did not know that. No, Lawrence confirmed. He believed he was succeeding. He believed the lies were working, the forgeries were credible, the theft was within reach. And your grandfather, Lawrence paused, choosing his words. Your grandfather wanted to see exactly how far your husband would go when he believed he was winning. I looked at the trust document on the table between us. March 2020. 3 years of protection I had not known I had. 3 years of Preston building evidence against himself while attacking something that could never fall. My grandfather had not just protected me. He had built a trap so perfect that Preston would destroy himself trying to spring it. The foundation was never at risk. I was never going to lose anything. But Preston did not know that. And my grandfather wanted to see exactly how far he would go when he believed he was winning. What I still did not know was how much evidence Clarence had already collected while I had been collecting my own. 3 weeks after learning about the irrevocable trust, I sat across from a man whose entire profession was being forgettable, and he handed me 18 months of reasons my marriage had been a crime scene. Desmond Roth, 55 years old and former FBI financial crimes investigator, sat across from me in a corner booth near South Station. His face was so deliberately forgettable that I understood immediately why my grandfather had chosen him. Medium height, medium build, brown hair going gray. The kind of person you would pass without noticing, which made him very good at watching others without being seen. The cafe was nearly empty at 3 in the afternoon, perfect for secrets. Desmond placed a USB drive on the table between us. Small, black, unremarkable. 18 months of work, he said. His voice was flat professional. Your grandfather hired me the month after your second wedding anniversary. July 2019. My second anniversary had been June 2019. Preston had taken me to Barcelona, told me some love stories deserved to circle back to their beginning. While we were drinking wine overlooking Las Ramblas, my grandfather was in Boston hiring a former FBI agent to document the end. I specialize in financial fraud, Desmond continued. Your grandfather suspected that was what this would become. He was correct. He opened a thin folder to the first page, a spreadsheet, numbers, dates, account identifiers. 7 illicit transactions by Weaver Development between January 2022 and March 2023. Funds diverted through shell accounts laundered through renovation projects that existed only on paper. Total $4.2 million. I looked at the numbers, precise, documented, irrefutable. $12 million construction loan, Desmond continued. Guaranteed under your name without your knowledge or signature, secured 18 months ago when his company started hemorrhaging money, your name, your credit score, forged authorization. 12 million using my name. Wire fraud, identity theft, loan fraud, conspiracy to commit bank fraud, each one a separate federal count. What do you call it when your own name is used as a weapon against you, when your signature, your address, your insurance policy become tools in someone else's fraud, and you are both victim and unwitting accomplice? The law has words for it, but those words do not capture what it feels like to discover your own existence has been weaponized. The affair with Saskia Calloway, Desmond said. Evidence suggests it began in early 2019, before your second wedding anniversary. Before. Not after. Before Barcelona. Before the wine, before Preston told me some love stories deserved to circle back. He had already started a different story. She worked for a non-profit he consulted with, development coordinator, 26 when they met. He presented himself as separated but finalizing divorce for tax reasons. She believed him until 14 months ago when she started asking questions he could not answer. I thought about Saskia at the anniversary party. 29 standing at the back table watching Preston with the expression of someone witnessing an inevitable collision. Every revelation here is documented, Desmond said. Timestamps, photographs, bank records, email headers, phone records from a second cell phone, everything you would need for divorce proceedings and everything the federal prosecutor would need for criminal charges. He closed the folder, then reached into his bag and pulled out a second envelope, smaller. His expression shifted slightly, the first hint of something other than professional detachment. There is one more thing, he said quietly. This has nothing to do with the money. He slid the envelope across the table. I opened it. Inside was a birth certificate. Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Date of birth 3 years ago. May 2020. Father Preston Weaver. Mother Saskia Calloway. Child a boy, 3 years old. I read the next line, then read it again. Residential address 287 Shawmut Avenue, Boston, Massachusetts. My address. The South End penthouse where I had lived with Preston for 5 years. The home where I slept every night, made coffee every morning, paid taxes and insurance. A child I did not know existed was registered as living at my address. In architecture, we talk about parasitic structures, buildings that attach themselves to existing foundations and slowly drain the host's resources. Preston had built an entire parasitic life using my infrastructure, and I had been the foundation holding it up without knowing what I carried. There is more, Desmond said. Page 2. I turned the page. Health insurance documentation. Policyholder Elodie Whitfield. Dependent minor listed. Coverage effective 3 years ago. My insurance policy, my name, my policy number. A 3-year-old child had been on my health insurance policy for his entire life. I had been paying premiums, monthly deductions from my bank account that I never questioned because insurance costs fluctuate, because premiums go up, because I trusted the numbers on my statements. I had been covering another woman's child for 3 years without knowing he existed. Insurance fraud, Desmond said quietly. Adding unauthorized dependents. Falsifying coverage applications, using your policy number for claims you never authorized. I looked at the birth certificate on the table. A child, 3 years old, covered by my insurance, living at my address on paper, without my knowledge, without my consent, without my signature, or with it forged the same way Preston had forged everything else. Preston had not just betrayed me. He had turned me into infrastructure for his second family. He had used my resources to support a life I did not know existed. He had made me pay, literally pay, month after month for the child he had created with another woman. The child was not just Preston's secret. He was registered at my home, insured under my policy, making me an unwitting accomplice to insurance fraud while I paid for another woman's child without consent or knowledge. According to the documentation, Desmond said there is more, evidence that does not fit on a birth certificate or a bank statement, but I thought you should see this first. I looked at the birth certificate. A child, 3 years old, covered by my insurance, living at my address, without my knowledge. Preston had not just betrayed me, he had turned me into infrastructure for his second family, using my resources to support a life I did not know existed. And according to Desmond, there was more evidence that did not fit on a birth certificate or a bank statement. I left the cafe with a birth certificate in my purse and walked to Boston Common because I needed to sit somewhere public while processing something unbearably private. The park was full of people: joggers, dog walkers, couples holding hands, families with children playing on the grass. I found an empty bench near the frog pond and sat down with the envelope in my lap. Policy number HC 4472891. My policy. Covering another woman's child. I pulled out the birth certificate again and read it for the 4th time. The 5th. The 6th. As if repetition would change what the words said. As if looking at them long enough would make them mean something different. Residential address 287 Shawmut Avenue, Boston, Massachusetts. My home. The South End penthouse where I had lived for 5 years. Where I paid property taxes and utilities and insurance premiums that apparently covered more people than I knew about. I started remembering 2 years ago. Preston offering to handle the insurance renewal because I was busy with the Harbor District restoration project. I had been grateful. I had kissed him and said thank you and gone back to work on elevation drawings. Last year. Preston saying he would take care of the paperwork for our annual policy review because I had a presentation to the Massachusetts Historical Commission. I had said he was thoughtful. I had believed I was lucky to have a partner who shared the administrative burden. 6 months ago, me reaching for the insurance folder to check coverage for a medical appointment. Preston gently taking it from my hands, saying he would look it up for me. I should not worry about details when I was already stressed about the zoning hearing. Every time he helped, he was hiding. Every kindness was a concealment. Every moment of what I had interpreted as marital support was actually fraud management, making sure I never looked closely enough at the documents to see the unauthorized dependent, the falsified coverage, the child who did not exist in my knowledge but existed on my policy. Not help, concealment. I sat there watching Boston move around me. A woman passed with a stroller. A man threw a tennis ball for his retriever. 3 teenagers took selfies near the monument. Life continuing normally while I sat with proof that my own life had been a construction I did not recognize. You need to understand what it means to discover you have been paying for your husband's child with another woman. Not just the betrayal, but the systematic fraud, the forged paperwork, the careful architecture required to build that deception. Every month, for 3 years, money had left my account. Premium increases. I never questioned because insurance costs rise because that is normal, because I trusted the person who handled the paperwork. How many doctor visits had I paid for? How many prescriptions? How many wellness checkups for a 3-year-old boy I had never met? I watched a mother across the path with a child about that age. 3 years old. Still learning to run properly, that stumbling toddler gait where excitement outpaces coordination. The boy laughed at something, a leaf, a bird, something only 3-year-olds find hilarious. His mother laughed with him. Somewhere in Boston, Preston's son was 3 years old. Learning to run, laughing at leaves, going to doctor appointments covered by my insurance policy, living at my address on official documents, existing in a parallel structure that used my life as its foundation. This was not a mistake. This was architecture. Preston had built a life inside our life. He had used my home address for mail, my insurance for health care, probably my tax deductions. I signed joint returns every April without reading them carefully because I trusted my husband. He had constructed an entire parallel household using me as infrastructure, without my consent, without my knowledge, with my signature forged on documents I had never seen. I was not just his wife, I was his foundation, the load-bearing structure holding up his fraud. In preservation, we call it adaptive reuse, when someone takes an existing structure and repurposes it for something entirely different from its original design. Preston had adaptively reused my entire life, my home, my insurance, my signature, my trust, all of it repurposed to support a family I never consented to build. I sat on that bench for 2 hours. The sun moved across the sky. The park emptied slowly as afternoon became evening. Families went home. Joggers finished their runs. The common grew quieter. I did not cry. I did not call anyone. I just sat there with a birth certificate on my lap and let the grief transform into something colder, something clearer, something useful. After 2 hours, I pulled out my phone. Briar Ashford, 33, and my closest friend since architecture school answered on the second ring. Can you come? I asked. Do not ask questions yet, just come. Where are you? Boston Common, near the frog pond. 20 minutes, she said and hung up. While I waited, I made 3 decisions with absolute clarity. First, I would not file for divorce yet. Not now. Not in June. Filing for divorce would tell Preston I knew. It would give him time to hide evidence, destroy documents, create explanations. It would let him control the narrative before I was ready to challenge it. No, I would wait. Second, I would attend the anniversary party Preston had been planning. November 14th, 5-year anniversary, the Langham, Boston. He had already sent save the dates to 120 people. He wanted a celebration, a performance, a public statement about our marriage. Fine, I would give him his stage. Third, I would let him speak first. Let him build his platform. Let him perform whatever script he had written. And then, when he had committed fully, when he had said everything he planned to say in front of 120 witnesses, I would let my grandfather show him what happens when you try to steal something that was never actually yours to take. I sat in that park for 2 hours. When I stood up, I had made 3 decisions. First, I would not file for divorce yet. Second, I would attend the anniversary party. Third, I would let him speak first, let him build the platform for his own destruction. What I needed now was someone who could show me exactly what Preston had been planning to do with those 12 buildings once he thought he owned them. Briar opened the door to her studio and saw my face and said the exact right thing. She said nothing at all. She stepped back. Let me in. Closed the door, went to the small kitchen and put the kettle on without asking if I wanted tea. The studio was one room editing desk against the wall couch that doubled as guest bed, architectural photographs covering every available surface. Her work. Buildings in various states of preservation, decay, renewal. I sat on the worn couch. The birth certificate was still in my purse. The USB drive from Desmond was in my pocket. Tell me, Breyer said. So I did. I told her about finding the folder on Preston's laptop, the forged documents, the irrevocable trust Clarence had created 3 years ago, the 18 months of surveillance by a former FBI investigator, 7 illicit transactions, $12 million in fraudulent loans secured with my name, the affair that started before our second anniversary. Every piece of evidence methodically cataloged like items in an inventory. And then I told her about the child, 3 years old, registered at my address, covered by my insurance policy for his entire life, premiums I had been paying without knowing he existed. Breyer listened without interrupting, without shock, without platitudes or reassurances that meant nothing. She just listened with the kind of attention that made space for truth instead of trying to immediately fix it. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I knew something was wrong. I have known for months. I just did not know how to ask without making it worse. I looked at her. You knew? Not the details, not any of this. She gestured at my purse where the birth certificate sat like evidence at a crime scene. But I could see it? The way you disappeared at events when he spoke? The way you stopped correcting people when they gave him credit for your work? The way you started editing yourself smaller and smaller until you barely spoke at all? I thought I was invisible, I said quietly, even to the people who cared. You were not invisible, Breyer said. You were being erased. Those are different things. There is something about telling the truth out loud for the first time, not to a lawyer building a case, not to yourself in the dark, but to someone who knows you well enough to hear what you are not saying between the words. The truth stops being something you carry alone and becomes something witnessed, something real. Breyer stood and went to her editing desk. I need to show you something. I did not know if it meant anything at the time. I thought about telling you. I did not know how. She woke up her computer and pulled up what looked like a photography archive. October 2022, 8 months ago. She scrolled through hundreds of images, people in formal wear, champagne glasses, architectural details. October Preservation Gala, she said. I was documenting the event for the Boston Preservation Alliance. This was just background. I shoot everything and sort later. She found the file she was looking for and opened it. A wide shot of the ballroom. People clustered in small groups. She zoomed in on one corner. 2 people standing close together, both looking down at something between them. A phone screen. Preston and Saskia. 8 months ago. October 2022. 5 months before I found the folder. 7 months before Desmond handed me evidence of their affair. At the time, Breyer said, I thought it was just networking. 2 people at a preservation event looking at project photos. It did not register. Can you zoom in more? I asked. Breyer pulled up her enhancement software. Clicked, adjusted. The image pixelated, then sharpened. The phone screen between Preston and Saskia came into focus. A map. 12 locations marked across Boston and New Orleans. I recognized them immediately. The 12 heritage buildings held by the Whitfield Heritage Foundation. The 12 properties I would eventually inherit. The 12 buildings Preston thought he would control. 3 of them had red annotations overlaid on the map. Can you read the text? I asked. Breyer zoomed further, adjusted contrast, sharpened again. The text resolved into legibility. Demolition feasibility assessment. Not preservation, not renovation, not adaptive reuse or historical restoration, or any of the language we used when talking about protecting buildings that had survived decades or centuries. Demolition. He was not just trying to take your money, Breyer said quietly. He was going to tear them down. I leaned forward looking at the 3 buildings marked for demolition. One of them I recognized immediately. The Harbor District Warehouse. The 19th century brick structure I had spent 14 months restoring. Every crack in the plaster documented. Every original window pane preserved. Every detail cataloged with the kind of obsessive care that preservation requires. 14 months of my life. Thousands of hours. Testimony before zoning boards and historical commissions. Fighting for funding and permits and protection status. Marked for demolition like it was a line item on a spreadsheet. Preservation is an act of faith. Faith that what has survived deserves to survive, that history has value beyond profit. Demolition is the opposite. It says only the future matters, that nothing is worth saving if something more profitable can replace it. It reduces heritage to real estate, culture to commodity, history to obstacles requiring removal. Preston was not just planning to steal from me. He was planning to destroy the work I had spent my entire career building, to demolish buildings I had fought to save, to erase history because luxury condominiums would generate better returns. This was not financial fraud. This was philosophical assault. An attack on everything I believed buildings could be, should be, deserved to remain. Which three? Breyer asked. I pointed to the screen. Harbor District Warehouse, the South End row houses, and the New Orleans Commercial Building from 1847. The ones you restored yourself. Yes. Breyer zoomed out slightly. On the map, barely visible, was a notation in smaller text. Development potential, luxury residential conversion, estimated ROI, return on investment. That was what my life's work had been reduced to in Preston's planning documents. Buildings that had survived fires and floods and economic collapse, and urban renewal buildings that had stood for over a century converted to profit margins. I looked at those 3 buildings on the screen. I had spent 14 months restoring one of them, every crack in the plaster documented, every original detail preserved, and he had marked it for demolition like it was a line item on a spreadsheet. This was not just about money anymore. It was about everything I had built my entire professional life to protect. 1 month after learning everything, I sat across from my grandfather in the same garden where he had made me promise to hide my inheritance, and I asked him the only question that mattered. Why did you let me marry him? July morning. Beacon Hill backyard. Lavender blooming purple and fragrant. Morning mist over the hedges. 2 wooden chairs worn smooth by decades. 2 cups of tea cooling between us. The same garden where we had sat the night before my wedding 5 years ago. But this time I was not a hopeful bride. I was a woman who had spent the past month cataloging every way my marriage had been a crime. How long did you know, I asked, about what Preston really wanted? Clarence looked at me with those calm gray eyes that had watched me grow up, watched me fall in love, watched me walk down the aisle toward a man he knew would hurt me. I ran a background check the week after you introduced him to me, he said. The week after. 5 years ago. I had brought Preston to family dinner in June, nervous, excited, wanting my grandfather to like the man I loved. They had talked about architecture and preservation. Preston had been charming, knowledgeable, respectful. And within 7 days, Clarence had hired someone to investigate him. The week after, I repeated. Not months later, not when we got engaged. The week after I introduced you. Yes. What did you see in that one dinner that made you suspicious? Clarence picked up his tea, set it down without drinking. He asked very specific questions about the foundation, about the trust structure, about who would inherit operational control. The kind of questions someone asks when they are evaluating an asset, not getting to know a family. I thought about that dinner, 5 years ago. I had been so focused on whether Preston liked my grandfather that I had not been paying attention to what Preston was actually asking. And you let me marry him anyway, I said. The words sat between us like an accusation. Clarence was quiet for a long moment. A robin landed on the garden wall. The lavender moved slightly in the breeze. Because you would have defended him, Clarence said finally. You were in love, and love does not hear warnings, it only learns from evidence. I looked at him. At this man who had raised me after my parents died, who had taught me chess and preservation philosophy and how to read a building's history. So you let me collect evidence, I said. For 5 years. I gave you time to see him clearly, Clarence corrected. Not through my suspicions or warnings, through his actions, through the lies he told when he thought no one was documenting them. What is love if not the hardest choice to watch someone you cherish walk into pain, because the alternative is watching them live in comfortable delusion, never knowing if trust was earned or assumed? My grandfather had chosen the harder path, not protection from pain, but tools to understand it. If I had told you what I suspected, Clarence continued, you would have married him anyway, but you would have spent 5 years wondering if I was wrong, defending him against doubts, questioning your own perception. You would have been divided between what you felt and what I told you to feel. He looked at me directly. This way you know. Not because I warned you, because you watched him build the fraud yourself, Because you collected evidence no one can dispute. Because when this marriage ends, you will never spend a single night wondering if you gave up too easily. I sat with those words, felt their weight, their terrible logic. He had not protected me from Preston. He had given me time to see Preston clearly, time to build a case so airtight that doubt would be impossible, time to become certain instead of suspicious. That is a different kind of love, Clarence said quietly. And I am sorry it had to hurt this much. The robin flew away. The tea grew cold. I thought about 5 years of marriage, 5 years of lies carefully documented, 5 years of evidence I had collected myself, evidence I could never dismiss because I had been the one watching. In restoration, we know some damage cannot be prevented, only documented. So when the structure finally fails, we understand exactly why and can build something stronger. My grandfather let me document 5 years of damage so I would never question why the marriage had to end, so I would never wonder if I had given up too soon. What happens now? I asked. Clarence reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out something small and placed it on the garden table between us. A key. Brass, old, unlabeled, small enough to fit in a palm. Now, he said, we finish what he started, on our terms. I looked at the key, then at him. The irrevocable trust was defense, Clarence continued, making sure he could never actually take what he was trying to steal. But defense is not enough. Not after what you showed me, the demolition plans, the cultural destruction, the systematic fraud. He pushed the key slightly toward me. Preston built a stage, Clarence said. He planned a performance. He invited 120 witnesses to watch him claim victory. So we let him have his stage, we let him perform, and then we show everyone exactly what he built that performance on. The key sat on the table, small, brass, innocuous. But keys are never just keys. They are transitions, shifts from one phase to another, from locked to open, from waiting to acting, from defense to offense. What does this key open? I asked. Clarence smiled. Not warmly, not cruelly, just the smile of a man who had been playing chess for 5 years while his opponent thought the game had not yet begun. Everything, he said. He placed the brass key on the garden table between us. I looked at it, then at him. What happens now? I had asked. Now, he said, we finish what he started, on our terms. I did not ask what the key opened. I already knew it was not a door but a phase, the shift from gathering evidence to using it. The text came from a number I had programmed as Mother Weaver 3 years ago and never once used to initiate contact. I need to tell you something I should have told you a long time ago. August. 1 week after Clarence gave me the brass key that represented the shift from defense to action. Preston was out of town at a development conference in Atlanta. I sat in our South End penthouse reading the message for the third time, trying to understand what Preston's mother could possibly need to confess. She chose a tea shop in Cambridge, neutral territory, far enough from Boston that we would not encounter anyone we knew, small enough that conversation would be private, but public enough to feel safe. I arrived 10 minutes early. She was already there. Iris Weaver, 67 years old, sat at a corner table with her hands gripping her purse so tightly her knuckles were white. No makeup, no pearls. None of the careful presentation I had seen for 5 years at family dinners and holidays. She looked smaller, older, terrified. I walked toward the table. Before I could sit, she spoke. I need to tell you something I should have told you a long time ago. I sat down slowly, placed my purse on the empty chair, looked at her directly. You did not ask me here to defend Preston, I said. No. Her voice was quiet, steady. I came to stop pretending I did not know what he was doing to you. The tea shop was nearly empty. Mid-afternoon on a weekday. Soft classical music playing from speakers I could not see. The smell of bergamot and vanilla. Everything designed for comfort. Everything feeling wrong. How long have you known? I asked. Iris looked down at her hands, still gripping the purse, still white-knuckled. Since the 2nd year of your marriage, she said. 2019. 3 years of knowing while you did not. 3 years. 2019 to 2022. 3 years of family dinners where she sat across from me. 3 Christmases. 3 Thanksgivings. 3 years of accepting my hospitality while knowing my husband had betrayed me. The affair, I said, not a question. Yes, with Saskia. I knew. Iris finally looked up. Her eyes were red. Every time I sat at your table and ate your food and accepted your kindness, I knew, and I said nothing. You need to understand what it means when someone chooses silence, not because they do not see the harm, but because speaking costs them something they are not willing to pay. Iris had seen. She had known. And she had calculated that my suffering was worth less than whatever speaking would cost her. Why, I asked. She took a breath, let it out slowly. I am financially dependent on him, she said. My pension is small. Preston supplements it, pays my rent, covers my medical insurance. When I found out about the affair, I thought about telling you. And then I thought about what would happen if he cut me off. She looked at me directly. So I stayed quiet, she continued. I told myself it was none of my business, that marriage was complicated, that you probably already knew. Every justification I could find for protecting my own comfort over your dignity. Her voice broke slightly. I chose the wrong child to protect, she said. I chose my comfort over your safety. I sat with that, felt the weight of it. 3 years of complicity, 3 years of choosing financial security over truth. 3 years of watching her son destroy someone and saying nothing because speaking would cost her something. I could hate her for it. Part of me did. But another part recognized the terrible honesty of what she was doing now, confessing without asking forgiveness, transferring the burden of knowledge she could no longer carry alone. Why tell me now, I asked. What changed? Iris was quiet for a moment. A server came by. We both shook our heads. She left. I heard him on the phone, Iris said finally. Last month, talking to someone about the foundation, about transfer documents, about how once he had control, he could demolish 3 buildings and convert them to luxury developments. He said your name like it was an obstacle to remove. She looked at me. I realized the affair was not the worst thing, she said. I realized he was planning something bigger, and I understood that staying silent made me complicit in more than just personal betrayal. I nodded, waited. There is something else, Iris said. Her hands finally released the purse, placed flat on the table. Something I should have told you before the wedding, before the engagement, before you ever agreed to date him. She took another breath. He researched your family for 6 months before he ever approached you, she said. He showed me the files, foundation records, property values, your grandfather's background, photos of you from preservation events. He planned it carefully. 6 months. I thought about the gallery opening where we met. October 2017, an architecture exhibition. I had been standing in front of a photograph of the Custom House Tower when someone said it looked better at sunset. I turned. Preston. Smiling, charming. We talked for an hour about historic buildings and adaptive reuse and what made Boston architecture unique. It had felt natural, serendipitous, like fate. The gallery opening, I said, was not chance, Iris confirmed. He engineered it. He knew exactly who you were and what you were worth before you ever knew his name. In preservation, we talk about original fabric, the materials a building was constructed with before any additions or alterations. I thought my marriage had original fabric, authentic foundation. I was wrong. It was staged from the first brick. Every beam, every support, every detail carefully calculated and manufactured. The conversation I remembered as spontaneous was scripted. The connection I felt was engineered. The man I fell in love with was a performance Preston had rehearsed for 6 months before our first hello. Thank you for telling me, I said. Iris looked surprised. What are you going to do? I stood, picked up my purse. I am going to finish what he started, I said. The right way. I walked out of the tea shop into August sunlight. Behind me, Iris sat alone with her confession delivered and her complicity acknowledged. What she did not know was that Preston's business partner had already reached out with evidence of his own. 3 days after Iris confessed, Preston's business partner called Lawrence Townsend asking for immunity, which told me everything about how close the walls were getting. Conrad Merrick, 45 and Preston's business partner since Weaver Development's founding, sat across the conference table looking professionally composed, except for hands that would not stay still on his briefcase. August afternoon. Lawrence's office. The same room where I had learned about the irrevocable trust that made Preston's entire scheme impossible from the start. Now I was learning how desperate Preston had become trying to execute that impossible scheme anyway. I need legal protection, Conrad said without preamble. Full indemnity. In exchange, I can give you everything. Lawrence's expression did not change. Everything meaning internal Weaver development documents, financial records, emails, contracts, 18 months of fraud I can no longer be associated with. Conrad was not here out of conscience. He was here because he could see federal charges forming on the horizon and wanted to position himself on the right side before they arrived. Loyalty was worth less than immunity. Partnership was worth less than protection. I understood the calculation. I did not respect it. He opened his briefcase and spread documents across the table. Financial statements, ledgers, balance sheets, each page showing Weaver Development deeper in debt than the last. 34 million, Conrad said. 3 separate creditors. 11 project contracts signed without actual capital backing. He was already drowning when he started forging your signature. I looked at the numbers. 2 years of hemorrhaging money while Preston maintained the facade of a successful man. Every luxury car, every confident handshake at preservation galas, all financed by debt he had no way to repay. Except one way. The Whitfield Foundation was not opportunity, Conrad said, meeting my eyes. It was his only way out. Lawrence made notes on his legal pad. Conrad reached back into his briefcase and slid one final document across the table. An email. Internal. From Preston to Conrad. Dated 3 weeks ago. Subject line: Anniversary Event Strategy. I read it once, then twice. The plan was clinical. Introduce a prenuptial agreement at the anniversary party as routine formality. Present it to Elodie in front of 120 witnesses. Use social pressure to make refusal seem paranoid, ungrateful, insulting to 5 years of marriage. If she resisted the prenup, pivot to the restructuring transfer as an alternative. Make her choose between 2 documents both designed to trap her. Hire a photographer to document the signing as evidence of willing consent. The entire evening engineered as a legal ambush disguised as celebration. He was going to bring papers, Lawrence said quietly. 2 sets, the prenup and the restructuring transfer. I leaned back in my chair. Thought about November 14th. 3 months away. 120 guests. Preston at the podium believing he had already won. So was I said. Lawrence looked at me. Conrad looked confused. I will bring my own papers, I said. Every forged signature, every fraudulent loan, every lie documented and time-stamped, and I will let him perform his script, build his stage, raise his glass, and then I will show 120 witnesses exactly what that performance was built on. Conrad stared at me with something that might have been respect or might have been fear. What Preston did not know was that I had already found his 4-year blueprint hidden in the safe at home. The key my grandfather gave me in July fit Preston's safe behind the bookshelf so perfectly that I understood immediately Clarence had known exactly where my husband kept his secrets. September 2023. Preston was in New York on a 3-day business trip. Development conference, networking dinners, meetings with potential investors who did not yet know his company was drowning in debt. He had kissed me goodbye at the door, reminded me to set the alarm, and told me he would call when he landed. I waited 2 hours after his flight departed. Then I went to the study. The bookshelf moved easier than I expected. Heavy oak floor to ceiling, but mounted on tracks that let it slide aside with steady pressure. Behind it, recessed into the wall, a safe. Black. Combination lock and keyhole. Professional grade. I held the brass key Clarence had given me in the Beacon Hill garden. Small, old, unlabeled. He had said it opened everything. I had not asked what he meant. Now I knew. The key slid into the lock. Perfect fit. I turned it, heard the mechanism click, felt the tumbler release. Clarence had not just known this safe existed. He had somehow acquired a key to it, which meant his intelligence network, the surveillance, the monitoring, the careful documentation went deeper than I had realized. I opened the safe door. Inside, organized like one of my restoration projects. Everything labeled, everything dated, everything cataloged with the kind of precision that comes from years of practice. Leather journal, 3 USB drives in labeled cases, property deeds in clear folders, and there, leather-bound with gilt edges, a handwritten notebook in blue ink. Preston's precise architectural lettering, the same careful hand he used for project sketches and presentation boards. I pulled out the notebook, opened to the first page. Year 2 month 3, March 2020. Entry: confirmed asset structure during BH visit. Foundation held in irrevocable trust, adjusted approach accordingly. March 2020, the month we visited Clarence's house for his 75th birthday. I remembered that weekend. Clarence had given Preston a tour of the library while I helped in the kitchen. Preston had been gone for 20 minutes. When he came back, he had been quiet, thoughtful. I had assumed he was just being respectful of my grandfather's space. He had been searching, and he had found Clarence's trust documents, had learned about the legal structure that made the foundation untouchable, had adjusted his approach accordingly, not by abandoning the scheme, but by building a more elaborate version designed to work around protections he thought he understood. I turned the pages. Year 2, Month 7. July 2020. Legal consultation. Cash anonymous transfer requirements under MA Trust Law. 3 signatures needed. Forgery timeline 18 to 24 months. Year 3, Month 1. January 2021. Foundation documents reviewed. Transfer mechanism identified. Initial prototypes practiced. Year 3, Month 6. June 2021. First acceptable signature replica achieved. Practice continues. You need to understand what it means to read someone's handwritten plan for your destruction. Not typed, not digital, but written in blue ink with the same careful lettering he used to write anniversary cards. The same hand that signed love notes. The same precise architectural style that made his project presentation so compelling. Applied to documenting exactly how he would steal everything I would inherit. I kept reading. Year 3, Month 9. September 2021. SC contacted. Initial approach successful. Backup plan established. SC Saskia Calloway. September 2021. 2 years ago. The affair had started earlier than Desmond's evidence suggested. Earlier than Iris had known. 2 years of planning that included recruiting an accomplice, establishing a backup identity, creating a parallel life. Year 4, Month 1, January 2022. Loan application submitted using WF credentials. First tranche approved. WF, Whitfield Foundation. My credentials, my name. My signature forged on loan applications I never saw while Preston hemorrhaged money keeping his company afloat with fraudulently obtained capital. Year 4, Month 6, June 2022. Weaver development cash flow critical. Acceleration required. Year 4, Month 12. December 2022. Final documents prepared. Signatures practiced and perfected. Timeline confirmed. I turned pages faster. Hands steady, phone ready to photograph. I would document his documentation, create evidence of his evidence, build a case from the blueprint he had built for my destruction. Year 5, Month 2. February 2023. Anniversary event planning initiated. Guest list compiled. Venue selected. Year 5, Month 5. May 2023. Transfer documents finalized. Dual approach confirmed. Celebration/pressure or celebration/ultimatum. In architecture, we create as-built drawings after construction documentation of exactly how a building was made, every decision, every modification. I was reading the as-built drawings for a 4-year fraud, except the building was my marriage, and the foundation was always meant to collapse. I reached the final pages. Year 5, Month 11, November 2023. Anniversary event, final execution. Below that, in smaller handwriting added later as if he had thought of it while reviewing his plan. If resistance, prenup clause 7B, non-negotiable. Public pressure, insufficient fallback. Must have legal recourse. Prenup clause 7B. I did not know what that was. I would find out. But first, I needed to document everything. I pulled out my phone, started photographing. Every page, every entry, every date and detail of the 4-year timeline Preston had built to steal what my grandfather had spent his life protecting. March 2020 to November 2023. 44 months, 132 weeks, 924 days. Every single one documented in Preston's careful architectural hand. I photographed the final page, then photographed it again for redundancy. 2 copies of Year 5, Month 11. 2 copies of anniversary event. Final execution. 2 copies of the prenup threat he had added as insurance. Evidence of evidence, documentation of documentation. Then I put everything back exactly as I had found it. Notebook in the same position. Journal aligned properly. USB drives in order, property deeds squared in their folder. I closed the safe, turned the key, slid the bookshelf back into place. Preston would return from New York in 2 days. He would open this safe, check his timeline, review his plan for November 14th, and he would never know that while he had been documenting his scheme in this hidden safe, I had been documenting his documentation. He had written Year 5 Anniversary Event. Final Execution. I had photographed it twice, and what Preston did not know was that while he had been planning final execution in secret, my grandfather had been planning his exposure with federal investigators. 4 years of Preston's planning, 5 years of Clarence's counter-planning, and 6 weeks until November 14th when both plans would collide in a ballroom filled with 120 witnesses. Those 6 weeks would be the longest performance of my life, but they would also be the most strategic. Late September, Beacon Hill Mansion Library. Morning light through leaded windows. 3 cups of tea cooling on the mahogany side table. My grandfather sat in the leather chair that had been his for 40 years. Lawrence Townsend sat across from him with a legal pad. I stood by the window looking out at the garden where Clarence had given me the brass key 2 months ago. "I'm keeping the anniversary party," I said. Clarence looked at me. Lawrence's pen paused on the paper. "November 14th, I continued. "The Langham, Boston. 120 guests. Preston has been planning it for months as his moment of triumph, so I'm going to let him have his stage." "And fill the audience," Clarence said quietly. "With witnesses," I confirmed. "Foundation board members, preservation officials, legal documentation. Every person in that ballroom will be someone who can testify to exactly what happened when Preston tries to announce his theft." Lawrence made a note. "His timeline says November 13th for the signing, November 14th for the celebration, which means he needs me to sign transfer documents this week or next," I said. "Before the party, so he can announce it as fait accompli." "Can you maintain composure for 6 more weeks?" Clarence asked. Not doubting, just confirming. I looked at him. At this man who had let me marry Preston, knowing exactly who he was, who had built legal fortresses and hired investigators and collected evidence while I collected my own, who had given me time to see clearly instead of warnings I might have dismissed. "Yes," I said. Lawrence flipped to a new page. "Guest list. Preston has suggested 40 people, mostly his business contacts and your mutual friends." "We need 87, I said. Both men looked at me. "Foundation board members," I explained. "Under the guise of celebrating my architecture career, 5 years of marriage coinciding with major professional milestones, it would be natural to invite colleagues, preservation partners, the people I have worked with on restoration projects." Clarence smiled, not warmly, the smile of a chess player watching the board shift. "Margaret Chen from Boston Preservation Alliance," he said. "Already on my list," I confirmed. "Along with the Massachusetts Historical Commission Director, 3 board members from the Architectural Heritage Foundation, Lawrence as family friend and legal witness." Lawrence nodded. "I will attend in both capacities." "The foundation bylaws," I said. "How many signatures does Preston actually need?" 3 board members to transfer chairmanship," Lawrence answered. "He has forged one. Yours would be the second. He would still need a third, which he cannot obtain because the other board members do not report to him and would question any transfer request." So even if I had signed legitimately, I said the scheme would have failed at the 3rd signature. "Yes," Lawrence confirmed, "but he does not know that. He thinks your signature is the final obstacle." I walked to the Langham the following week. Told Preston I wanted to see the venue, make sure the event reflected both of us properly. He had been pleased, proud, thinking I was finally engaging with the celebration he had been planning. The ballroom was elegant, high ceilings, architectural ironwork along the balconies, decorative cages in wrought iron, beautiful and confining. I wondered if Preston saw the symbolism. Probably not. He saw a beautiful venue for his victory announcement. I saw the courtroom where his fraud would be exposed. October arrived. The guest list grew. Preston noticed and approved, thinking I was finally embracing the social significance of our anniversary. 87 people, foundation partners, preservation officials, colleagues who had watched him take credit for my work, witnesses who would see him try to take everything. Mid-October. Evening at the South End penthouse. Preston came home from the office with his briefcase, set it on the dining table, called me from the kitchen where I was pretending to care about dinner. I need you to look at something, he said. I walked into the dining room. He had spread documents across the table, transfer agreements, foundation restructuring papers. The same ones I had photographed from his laptop 6 months ago, now printed and formatted for signing. What is this? I asked. Innocent, curious. The wife who trusted her husband with financial planning. Foundation paperwork, Preston said. We need to update some things before the anniversary party. Tax purposes, administrative cleanup. He smiled. Used my name the way he always did when he wanted something. Warm, affectionate. The performance he had perfected over 5 years. It is just formality, he continued. But the accountant says it should be filed before November 14th. Something about fiscal year documentation. I picked up the pen he offered, Mont Blanc, black and gold. The pen he had given me for our first anniversary back when I still believed the gifts meant something. Lawrence had coached me carefully. Sign with wrong middle initial. Slightly altered slant. Pressure too light in specific places. Changes subtle enough that Preston would not notice, but obvious enough that any legal challenge would invalidate the signature immediately. I signed. He watched, smiled, kissed my forehead. Thank you, he said. This makes everything so much simpler. He filed the documents in his study safe. The same safe I had opened with Clarence's key. The same safe that held his 4-year timeline documenting every step of this fraud. That night, Preston prepared for bed humming something I did not recognize. Content, confident, completely unaware that the signature he had just secured was legally worthless and that in 3 weeks he would stand in a ballroom filled with witnesses to his attempted theft. I lay in the dark listening to him breathe. Even. Peaceful. The sleep of someone who believed everything was going according to plan. He slept soundly that night. I lay beside him in the dark and thought about demolition plans, forged signatures, and a 3-year-old child whose address was listed as our home. And then I thought about what happens when you remove a false foundation. The ballroom filled with 120 guests, and my husband had no idea he was standing in a room full of witnesses. November 14th, the Langham, Boston. 22nd floor. White orchids everywhere. Preston had insisted on them, said they photographed elegantly, never asked what I wanted for my own anniversary. Warm lighting that made everyone look softer, kinder, more forgiving than they actually were. A jazz quartet playing near the bar, something smooth and meaningless. I stood near the entrance greeting arrivals. Preston worked the room with champagne and confidence, introducing people, making connections, performing the role of successful husband, celebrating successful marriage. He had no idea what I had done to the guest list. 2 streams of people flowed into the ballroom. On one side, Preston's business contacts, developers, investors, the 43 people he had suggested inviting colleagues who knew him as charming, ambitious someone on the rise. On the other side, my carefully orchestrated 77. Foundation board members, preservation officials, the Massachusetts Historical Commission director, Margaret from the Boston Preservation Alliance, architectural colleagues who had watched Preston take credit for my work for 5 years, witnesses, every single one of them. Clarence stood near the bar, nursing sparkling water, watching everything with those calm gray eyes. He caught my attention, gave the smallest nod. Margaret had arrived. She had brought the MHC director just as he had asked her to. I smiled and counted. 43 of his, 77 of mine. 64% of this anniversary party consisted of people who could testify to fraud, forgery, and systematic theft. Preston thought they were here to celebrate. They were here to witness. This is my wife, Elodie, Preston said, introducing me to someone I did not recognize. 5 years tonight. I shook hands, smiled, played the role I had been playing for 6 weeks. The happy wife excited about the anniversary, grateful for the celebration Preston had planned. The performance was almost over. 7:15. Preston found me near the center of the ballroom. He had someone with him. Thomas Rowland, a real estate developer in his 50s whom I recognized from preservation meetings. Preston's arm went around my waist, proprietary and confident. Thomas, this is my wife, Preston said. She has a good eye for old buildings. I have been helping her channel that. The words hung in the air, the same dismissive phrasing he had used 100 times before. My wife. Good eye. I have been helping her. Thomas looked at me with polite interest. Your foundation work is impressive, Mrs. Weaver. Whitfield, I corrected gently. I kept my name, and thank you. Across the room, Sterling Harding stood near the exit with a clear sight line to the podium. Our eyes met. I gave the smallest shake of my head. Not yet. Soon, but not yet. Sterling nodded. Waited. He knew what was coming. He had agreed to help document it to stand as professional witness when Preston's fraud was exposed. But first, Preston needed to perform. He needed to say the words he had been rehearsing. He needed to walk fully into the trap. The white orchids smelled like funerals. Preston had insisted on them, said they photographed elegantly, said they looked expensive and tasteful and exactly right for announcing important news at an anniversary celebration. He had never asked what I wanted. He had never asked if white orchids reminded me of my grandmother's funeral, if their scent made me think of grief instead of celebration. He had never asked because my preferences did not matter. Only the performance mattered. Only the image he was building mattered. 7:40. The jazz quartet finished their set. Conversations quieted. Guests found their seats or positions around the room. The ballroom settled into anticipation. Preston moved toward the podium at the front. A screen behind him flickered on dark waiting, ready for whatever presentation he believed would announce his triumph. He had told me it was a slideshow of our 5 years together. Photos from the wedding, the honeymoon anniversaries, professional events. A celebration of our partnership. I knew it was something else. Documents. Transfer papers. Visual proof of what he thought I had signed. The announcement of his control over the foundation presented as romantic milestone. Clarence sat front left 3 rows back, positioned perfectly to see both Preston and the screen. Lawrence Townsend sat 2 seats over legal pad in his lap, ready to document everything. Foundation board members throughout the room. Preservation officials along the sides. Architectural colleagues near the bar. 120 people, 64% of them mine. Preston tapped his champagne glass with his wedding ring. One clear note. The room quieted completely. If I could have everyone's attention, he said. His voice was warm, confident, happy. The voice of a man about to announce good news. The voice of someone who believed he had already won. 5 years ago tonight, Preston continued, I married the most remarkable woman I have ever met. I stood beside him, smiled, performed the role of grateful wife one final time. Elodie brought brilliance to this marriage, he said. I brought structure. My hand in his felt like evidence, like a photograph that would be examined later, like the last time he would touch me as my husband instead of my defendant. His palm was warm. His grip was confident. He believed this moment would cement everything he had spent 5 years building. He had no idea the foundation was already gone. Tonight is not just about celebrating 5 years, Preston said, his voice building toward the announcement he had planned for months. It is about announcing our future. The room watched. 120 people with champagne raised and smiles fixed, waiting for the romantic revelation, waiting for the sweet anniversary surprise. His hand squeezed mine. The room held its breath. Then Preston said the sentence he had been rehearsing for days, the one he believed would finally publicly reduce me to exactly what he needed me to be. If it were not for me, she would be nothing. The words landed at the ballroom like stones. Preston's voice was confident, certain, the voice of someone stating obvious truth to a room full of people who would naturally agree. Everything she has accomplished, he continued, his hand still on mine at the podium, I made possible. Every restoration project, every preservation award, every professional milestone. Without my guidance, without my vision, without my network, she would be nothing. Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd, uncertain. The kind of sound people make when they are not sure if they heard correctly but do not want to seem unsupportive. A few guests glanced at me. I did not move. My champagne remained steady in my hand. My face remained arranged in the expression I had perfected. Preston paused, waited for the laughter to fade, then delivered the line he had been building toward. She does not deserve to carry my name. The laughter died instantly. The ballroom went silent in the way rooms do when everyone stops breathing at once. 120 people staring. Half of them Preston's expecting romantic announcement, half of them mine waiting for exposure. I stood completely motionless, expression unchanged, letting every single person in that room witness exactly what my husband was. But I have been patient, Preston continued. I have been generous, and now it is time to formalize what we both know is true. He was performing, reading from a script he had written and rehearsed, building toward the announcement he believed would cement his control. The signature he thought I had given him. The transfer he thought had already happened. I did not flinch. I did not cry. I did not look away. I let them all see exactly what he was. 120 witnesses watching me stand beside my husband while he publicly announced I was nothing without him. Let them watch. At the back of the ballroom, Saskia Calloway stood alone at a corner table. 29 years old, the woman who had been Preston's mistress for 4 years, the mother of his 3-year-old child. She watched him with the expression of someone witnessing an inevitable wreck, horror and resignation, mixed with the particular stillness that comes from knowing you cannot stop what is already in motion. Near the front, Iris Weaver sat with her hands gripping her purse. 67 years old, Preston's mother, the woman who had known about the affair for 3 years and said nothing. She closed her eyes when Preston said I did not deserve his name, did not look at me, did not look at her son. Just closed her eyes like she could make it stop by not witnessing it. But everyone else watched. 77 of my carefully selected guests watching Preston destroy his wife in public. Foundation board members, preservation officials, architectural colleagues, legal witnesses to systematic cruelty. Architects know the precise moment a structure fails, the split second between standing and collapse when the mathematics stop lying and the building understands what it has always been. I watched that moment arrive on faces throughout the ballroom. The moment people stopped seeing charming Preston and started seeing something else. The scrape of a chair against polished floor broke the silence. Slow, deliberate, impossibly loud in the quiet ballroom. My grandfather stood. He did not stand quickly. He did not stand with drama or anger. He stood the way a man stands when he has already made his decision and is simply tired of watching other people pretend. 79 years old. The man who built the foundation Preston was trying to steal. The man who had let me marry a predator so I would see clearly enough to understand why. Clarence looked at Preston with calm, measured expression. The same expression he had worn in the Beacon Hill garden when he gave me the brass key. The same expression he had worn the night before my wedding when he asked me to keep my inheritance secret. The room went absolutely silent. If you believe she is nothing without you, Clarence said, his voice quiet and devastating. Perhaps you would like to tell the room what exactly did you bring to this marriage? The question hung in the air, not aggressive, not defensive, just a simple question delivered with perfect calm. Preston's hand tightened on mine. His smile stayed fixed, but something changed behind his eyes. I brought partnership, Preston said after a pause. Vision, the ability to see her potential and help her reach it. I see, Clarence said. He looked at Preston the way you look at a building you are about to demolish, measuring, calculating, confirming what needs to be removed. And to the Whitfield Heritage Foundation, what did you bring to that? Preston's smile flickered, just for a second, but I saw it. The foundation has always been a family matter, Preston said, his voice still confident but something tighter underneath. I have simply been helping to modernize it, bring it into sustainable financial structures, protect the legacy your granddaughter will inherit. Clarence nodded slowly. Then he looked toward the side of the room where Lawrence Townsend sat with a briefcase on his lap and a legal pad in his hand. And perhaps you could explain that modernization to the room, Clarence said quietly. Lawrence has some documents that might help illustrate exactly what you brought. The ballroom had gone so quiet I could hear the ice melting in abandoned champagne glasses, the rustle of silk as Iris shifted in her seat, the paper whisper as Lawrence opened his briefcase. Preston's hand released mine. His smile was still there but frozen now. Fixed. The smile of someone who has just realized something is wrong but does not yet understand what. His eyes went from Clarence to Lawrence to me, searching, calculating, the room composition, the questions, the documents Lawrence was pulling from the briefcase, all of it adding up to an equation he had not anticipated. Preston's smile flickered, just for a second, but I saw it. And in that second, I think he finally understood that tonight had never been his party. The screen lighting up with the first forged foundation document felt like watching a nuclear bomb detonate in slow motion. Lawrence's voice cut through the ballroom like a scalpel. What you see here is a foundation grant application from 18 months ago. Note the signature at the bottom. Preston Hartwell, Director of Operations. The document filled the screen. Even from where I stood, I could see the elegant forgery, Preston's signature on paperwork that promised funds to a charity that had never received a single cent. Next slide, Lawrence said. Another document. Then another, each one more damning than the last. Grant applications, loan requests, financial projections that existed only on paper. The foundation's money flowing out in a dozen different directions, none of them legitimate. Preston's lawyer stood up. This is an ambush. These documents are authenticated, Lawrence interrupted, by 3 independent forensic accountants. Their reports are in the packets being distributed to each table as we speak. I watched servers move through the room, placing manila folders in front of every guest. The rustling of paper filled the ballroom as people began to read. Preston's face had gone white. Elodie, tell them this is a mistake. I said nothing. I had not spoken all evening. I would not break that silence for him. Moving on, Lawrence continued. Audio evidence, recorded 3 weeks ago. Preston's voice filled the ballroom through the sound system, clear, unmistakable. The wife's situation is handled. She doesn't suspect anything. By the time the divorce goes through, the assets will be safely transferred. Saskia's voice responded. And if she fights it, she won't have anything to fight with. I've made sure of that. The ballroom erupted. Gasps, whispers, the sound of chairs scraping as people turned to stare. The old Elodie would have felt satisfaction. I felt only the cold weight of justice. Sterling Whitmore stood up at his table. At 83, the retired federal judge still commanded a room with a single gesture. I have known Elodie Whitfield for 40 years. I knew her father. I watched her build one of the most successful consulting practices in this city through intelligence, integrity, and relentless dedication to her clients. He looked directly at Preston. The insinuations made against her professional competence are not only false, they are defamatory. I would be happy to testify to that effect in any legal proceeding. The weight of his words settled over the room. Sterling Whitmore did not make statements lightly. His endorsement was worth more than any defense I could have mounted myself. Thank you, Your Honor, Lawrence said. Now regarding the trust structure that Mr. Weaver attempted to exploit. Lawrence Townsend stepped forward from his position near the screen. 3 years ago, Clarence Whitfield established an irrevocable trust protecting all foundation assets, he said. As legal counsel to that trust, I can confirm that none of those assets were ever subject to Mr. Weaver's control or manipulation. The attempt to transfer funds was legally void from the outset. Preston turned to Renata. She was already backing away, her carefully maintained composure cracking. You said it would work. You said the trust was vulnerable. I said what you paid me to say, Saskia shot back. This is on you. Conrad Merrick stood up near the side of the room. He looked directly at Preston. I built this partnership on a reputation for honest dealing, he said. Effective immediately, I am dissolving Weaver Development. Our creditors will be paid from the liquidation. Our employees will receive their severance packages, and you will receive nothing. He looked at his son. You have destroyed that reputation in less than 2 years. Effective immediately, I am declaring corporate bankruptcy and dissolving the company. Our creditors will be paid from the liquidation. Our employees will receive their severance packages, and you will receive nothing. Watching Preston's empire collapse felt like watching dominoes fall, inevitable, irreversible, almost beautiful in its precision. Saskia moved through the crowd to the podium. She handed Lawrence a small USB drive. Recordings from the past 6 months, she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Every meeting, every phone call, every conversation where Preston Hartwell discussed defrauding his wife, manipulating the foundation, and bribing city officials for favorable zoning decisions. The room went silent. Preston lunged toward the podium. Security guards materialized from the shadows blocking his path. You cannot do this, he snarled. You do not have the right. Actually, District Attorney Morrison said, rising from her table near the front. We have every right. Mr. Weaver, you should know that the U.S. Attorney's Office will be filing charges on Monday morning. I would recommend you retain counsel. Preston spun around, wild-eyed, searching the crowd until his gaze landed on me. I stood motionless, my hands folded in front of me, my expression carefully neutral. He pointed at me. She planned all of this. I looked at him for a moment. The man I had loved, the man I had trusted, the man who had tried to destroy me. I took one step forward. Yes, I said. It was the first thing I had said all evening. I did. The ballroom emptied in silence. No congratulations, no goodbyes, just the sound of expensive shoes on marble and the weight of what everyone had witnessed. I stood near the podium while 300 guests filed past without meeting my eyes. They avoided looking at Preston, too, still seated at the abandoned head table with his hands flat against the white tablecloth. The microphone remained on the podium. The white orchid centerpieces wilted under the warm lights. Clarence appeared at my elbow. Do you want to leave now? Not yet, I said. I need to see it finished. Lawrence stood near the ballroom entrance, speaking quietly with security. I caught fragments: custody of evidence, counsel en route, premises secured. When he reached Preston's table, his voice carried across the nearly empty room. Mr. Weaver is not to leave the premises until counsel arrives. Preston looked up, his face blank. He said nothing. The man who had filled this ballroom with his voice 2 hours ago had finally run out of words. I had wanted this, planned it, executed it with precision that would have impressed my grandfather. But watching the last guests disappear through the gilt doors, I felt only exhaustion where triumph should have been. Victory looked exactly like the wreckage of a marriage that had never been real. The waitstaff began clearing tables. I listened to the clink of crystal, the rustle of linens, the ordinary sounds of an event ending. Just another anniversary party. Just another night at the Langham. Clarence touched my shoulder. We should go. I followed him toward the exit. We passed Preston's table without speaking. He did not look up. Iris waited in the hallway. She stood near the coat check, her black dress perfect, her posture impeccable. But her hands trembled when she saw me. I did not follow him, she said. I know it is too late for that to mean much. Clarence started to step between us, but I raised my hand. It is fine. Iris looked at me directly. No excuses in her expression. No deflection. I knew. Not everything, but enough. And I chose his comfort over your dignity again and again. I had imagined this conversation 1,000 times. In my fantasies, she made excuses, claimed ignorance, defended her son with a mother's blind loyalty. Instead, she gave me the truth without decoration. Thank you for saying that, I said. I cannot forgive it, but I can acknowledge you said it. She nodded once, then walked toward the ballroom. To sit with her son while he waited for his lawyer. To do what mothers do even when their children do not deserve it. I had wanted her to say it for 5 years, that she knew that she chose him anyway. And now that she had, I felt nothing where vindication should have been. Clarence drove me home. We did not speak. There was nothing left to say that the evening had not already spoken. A week later, I sat in Lawrence's office while Saskia Calloway signed cooperation agreements across his mahogany desk. She looked different than she had at the ballroom. No designer dress, no confident posture, just a 29-year-old woman in a Target blazer holding a pen with bitten fingernails. The foundation will cover legal representation and living expenses during the investigation period, Lawrence explained. He slid 3 documents across the desk. Federal Witness Protection Protocols, Identity Shield for the minor child, Full Cooperation Agreement. Saskia looked at me. Why would you help me? I was part of what he did to you. I am not helping you because you deserve it, I said. I am helping you because that child deserves it, and because making sure he faces every charge is the most effective use of resources I have. She flinched, but she did not argue. Lawrence continued through the documents, his voice steady and professional. Financial support until the trial concluded. Housing assistance. Legal fees covered. Everything structured through the foundation, everything designed to keep a 3-year-old girl from paying for her father's crimes. This protects your daughter's identity and ensures Preston cannot access custody or visitation, Lawrence said. Saskia picked up the pen. Her hand shook. I recorded everything because I thought he would leave his wife for me, she said quietly. I was wrong about all of it. She had been 26 when Preston met her. Young enough to believe his promises, young enough to think love justified betrayal, young enough to record his confessions as insurance and call it romance. Saskia's daughter was 3 years old, the same age as the lie, conceived the same month. Preston first forged my grandfather's signature, born into a false foundation. The U.S. attorney will contact you within 48 hours, Lawrence said. Do not speak to Preston or anyone from his legal team. If he attempts, contact, document it and inform us immediately. Saskia signed the first document, then the second. Her signature was small and careful, each letter perfectly formed. I watched her sign the third agreement, the one that protected her daughter from ever appearing in court records, from ever being named in news coverage, from ever being identified as Preston Weaver's child. As she signed, I thought about what my grandfather said about the foundation, that it existed to protect things worth preserving. He had meant buildings, but perhaps the principle extended further. The federal indictment listed 4 counts and 27 pages of evidence, and his name appeared 132 times. Lawrence walked me through it in his office the morning the charges were filed. Wire fraud, identity fraud, fraudulent conveyance, conspiracy. Each count supported by documentation that Saskia had recorded, emails that forensic accountants had recovered, and foundation records that showed exactly when Preston had started forging signatures. The recordings Saskia provided establish intent and premeditation, Lawrence said. He turned to page 14, where a transcript showed Preston discussing how to backdate documents. This alone would be sufficient. Everything else is corroboration. I read the indictment carefully. The language was precise and bloodless. It described crimes, not betrayals. It listed dollar amounts, not broken promises. The federal government did not care that Preston had told me he loved me while planning to steal my inheritance. They cared only that he had committed fraud across state lines, using electronic communications. What does he have left? I asked. Nothing liquid, Lawrence said. Everything is frozen. He retained defense counsel on credit lines, zero cash available. I had spent months building this case. I had documented every forgery traced, every fraudulent transfer collected, every piece of evidence that would survive cross-examination. But watching the consequences unfold felt different than planning them. Clinical, distant, like reading about someone else's life in a legal filing. Perhaps that was the truth of it. Consequences were not punishment. They were simply what happened when false structures finally collapsed under the weight of reality. Weaver Development filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy on November 15th. Lawrence brought me the filing that afternoon. $34 million in debt, he read. The fraudulent loans using foundation collateral destroyed their credit standing. No bank will refinance, no investor will touch them. I looked at the list of creditors: construction firms, material suppliers, subcontractors who had worked on projects that would never be completed, people who had trusted Preston the way I once had. Conrad is forming his own firm, I asked. He filed separation paperwork yesterday, Lawrence said. Takes the viable projects and cuts Preston loose completely. The new company has no liability for Weaver Development debts. Conrad had worked with Preston for 8 years. They had been partners, friends, mutual witnesses at each other's weddings. But when the foundation cracked, Conrad had stepped cleanly away, taking everything of value and leaving Preston with a shell company and mounting legal fees. I had imagined this moment would feel like victory, watching him lose everything, while I kept what was always mine. But instead, it felt like watching a building collapse after the false supports were removed, inevitable, structural, almost boring in its predictability. The article ran this morning, Lawrence said in late November. He handed me a copy of the Boston Architecture Review. It has been shared across 14 professional networks already. The headline read, "Anniversary to Remember How Whitfield Heritage Foundation Survived Attempted Hostile Takeover." That is one way to phrase it, I said. The article was thorough. It detailed Preston's attempts to gain control of the foundation, the forged documents, the attempted asset transfers. It quoted Sterling Whitmore extensively about my professional reputation. It mentioned Saskia only as a cooperating witness, without naming her or her daughter. By the time I finished reading, the article had been cited in 3 preservation journals and 2 legal ethics publications. My phone showed 47 unread emails from colleagues I had not spoken to in years. The professional world that had watched me disappear behind Preston's shadow was suddenly very interested in welcoming me back. On December 5th, Lawrence presented the final divorce papers. No marital assets to divide thanks to the trust structure, he said. He signs himself out of your life with nothing. The dissolution took 6 minutes. I signed on page 4. Preston's signature appeared on page 7, notarized at the correctional facility, where he was being held, pending trial. The marriage that had lasted 5 years ended with 2 signatures and a clerk's stamp. I walked out of the courthouse into cold December sunlight. 5 years ago, I had walked up those same steps in a cream silk dress, believing I was building a partnership. Now I walked down them alone, having dismantled everything that partnership had pretended to be. The foundation board met 3 weeks later. I sat at the head of the table where my grandfather had sat for 40 years, where Preston had tried to sit for 6 months. "Thank you for your continued trust," I told the assembled members. "These preservation initiatives have been in development for some time, and now we can move forward without interference." I presented 4 proposals that afternoon: a historic textile mill conversion, a 19th century church restoration, a brownstone district protection plan, a maritime warehouse preservation project. Each one had been ready for months, waiting only for the obstruction to clear. The board approved all 4. 32 signatures today, Lawrence observed afterward. That is a record for a single session. 32 signatures in one afternoon. Projects I had been developing quietly for years, waiting for the obstruction to clear, so the foundation could do what it was always meant to do. Clarence sat in the front row throughout the meeting, founder emeritus, watching his granddaughter run the organization he had built. When it ended, he walked with me to the elevator. "How does it feel?" he asked. I thought honestly. The indictment, the bankruptcy, the divorce, the board meeting, the 32 signatures, the preservation work that would now move forward without someone trying to monetize it at every turn. Like something that was always true finally became visible, I said. The elevator doors opened. Clarence smiled. It was the same smile he had given me at 7 years old, when I had explained why a particular building deserved protection, using words I had learned from watching him work. He had always known what I was capable of. The past 6 months had simply been the process of making sure everyone else knew it too. The email from Preston's lawyer arrived on December 18th with the subject line "Rental Application, 447 Shawmut Avenue." Visibility, I had learned, carried consequences beyond recognition. People saw me now. That included people who no longer had anywhere else to turn. Lawrence forwarded the message without comment. His counsel is requesting temporary housing. The address he listed as foundation property. I read the application. Preston needed somewhere to live while his assets remained frozen pending trial. The South End penthouse he wanted to rent belonged to the Whitfield Foundation property portfolio, a 1-bedroom unit on the 4th floor of a building my grandfather had preserved in 1987. The irony was so precise it felt almost theatrical. "He may stay," I told Lawrence. "Current market rate, first and last month paid immediately, no exceptions." "The foundation does not offer charity," Lawrence asked. "The foundation offers fair terms," I said, "equally." Preston would become my tenant. He would pay rent to the organization he had tried to steal. He would live in a building preserved by the foundation he had attempted to destroy. And he would do it under the same terms as every other renter, because fairness meant treating everyone the same, even people who had treated you with contempt. The final week before Christmas, Clarence and I flew to New Orleans to visit one of the foundation's major restoration projects. A 19th century warehouse on the river, brick and timber, converted into mixed-use space that housed artists and a community theater. We walked through the building on a cold December afternoon. The exposed brick walls still showed scorch marks from a fire in 1924. The iron support beams bore the foundry stamps from 1886. Every scar visible, every repair honest about what it was replacing. Clarence stopped in the main hall and placed his hand against the brick. "Your grandmother and I met in a building like this. 1968. It was scheduled for demolition." I had never heard this story. "I never knew that was where you met." "She was protesting the demolition," he said. "I was the developer's attorney sent to negotiate with the preservationists." She looked at me and said, "Anything that survives 100 years deserves another 100. Not because it is beautiful, because it endured honestly." He smiled at the memory. She chose the foundation motto based on that afternoon. I stood in that warehouse, 137 years old, survivor of 2 fires, 3 floods, 4 owners who had tried to demolish it, and one preservation battle that took 11 years and understood what my grandmother had meant. The warehouse had survived 137 years, not because it was beautiful, but because its foundation was honest brick and iron instead of false promises. What endures, endures honestly, I said quietly. She wore those words engraved inside her wedding band, Clarence said, every day for 43 years. On New Year's Eve, I sat alone in my office while the city prepared to celebrate. I had declined 3 party invitations. I wanted to spend the last night of this year in silence, reviewing what the foundation had accomplished and planning what we would build next. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my grandmother's ring. I had carried it since July, since the day I found Preston's timeline, since the day I decided to stop hiding. The gold was warm from being against my body for 6 months. I had never examined it closely. I had simply carried it as a talisman, a reminder of the woman who had built something worth preserving and passed it down to someone who would fight to keep it. I turned it toward the desk lamp and looked at the inscription inside the band. What endures, endures honestly. The foundation motto. Her wedding band, the same words. I sat holding the ring while fireworks started going off somewhere over the harbor. My grandmother had worn these words for 43 years of marriage. She had chosen them as the foundation's guiding principle. She had built her entire life around the conviction that survival required truth, that endurance demanded honesty, that anything worth preserving had to be worth preserving exactly as it was. Preston had paid first and last month on December 27th. He lived in my building now, paid rent to the foundation he had tried to steal, woke up every morning in a space preserved by the organization he had attempted to destroy. I could have denied the application. I could have cited conflict of interest, personal history, reasonable concerns about propriety. No one would have questioned it. But fairness meant treating everyone equally, and the foundation existed to preserve things worth preserving, including its own principles when applying them became inconvenient. I had spent 5 years believing my value needed his validation, 4 months gathering evidence of his betrayal, and one terrible November watching everything collapse. But the truth was simpler. I had always been exactly who I was, and the only lie was thinking I needed him to make it real. The work I did for the foundation was the same work whether anyone knew my name or not. The preservation projects I had developed were valuable whether Preston took credit or I did. My competence existed independent of recognition. My integrity remained constant whether witnessed or invisible. My value was never his to assign, it was always mine to carry. The foundation that endured was not the one Preston tried to build on forged signatures and fraudulent transfers. It was the one my grandmother established on honest conviction that my grandfather maintained through patient work, that I had protected by refusing to let performance replace truth. Midnight approached. The fireworks intensified. I could hear cheering from the street below, people celebrating the arrival of a new year. I slipped my grandmother's ring onto my right hand. It fit perfectly as though it had been waiting. What endures, endures honestly. She chose those words long ago. It took me 34 years and one very long November to understand why. And to you listening to my story, remember this: your value is not determined by someone else's validation, and what you build honestly cannot be stolen by lies. Don't make my mistake of stepping back from what you built to make room for someone who never deserved that space. I trusted too easily because I wanted to believe that love and partnership meant the same thing. I ignored small warning signs because I thought giving someone access to my life's work proved my commitment. But trust should be earned through consistency, not granted because someone says the right words at the right time. What I learned is that what endures must endure honestly. You cannot build anything lasting on a foundation of performance and false promises. When I discovered my husband's betrayal, I had two choices: collapse under the weight of that truth or use it to rebuild something stronger. I chose truth. I chose documentation over confrontation, strategy over emotion, and patient justice over immediate revenge. I believe God allowed me to find that timeline in July for a reason, so I would have time to protect what my grandparents built and to remember who I was before I tried to become someone else's version of acceptable. The foundation motto my grandmother chose was, "Write what endures, endures honestly." That applies to buildings and it applies to lives. I want to hear from you. What would you have done in my position? Would you have confronted him immediately, or would you have built your case quietly the way I did? Leave a comment and let me know your thoughts. If this story resonated with you, or if you know someone who needs to hear it, please share it. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe to Her Drama Stories so you don't miss what comes next. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your time and attention mean more than you know. One final note. Some elements of this story have been adjusted for storytelling and reflection. Any resemblance to specific people or situations is coincidental. What matters is the lesson at its heart.